Hidden away within the rocks of these deserts are a people known as the Fremen, who have long held a prophecy that a man would come, a Messiah, who would lead them to true freedom. The planet is Arrakis, also known as DUNE.
In 1984 saw the epic sci-fi DUNE hit the big screen after many failed attempts. It was based on the extremely popular novel with the same name from 1965. After the success of the novel, attempts to adapt DUNE for a film began as early as 1971. A lengthy process of development hell followed throughout the 1970s, during which time both Arthur P. Jacobs and Alejandro Jodorowsky tried to bring their visions to the screen. Ridley Scott at one point was attached, but due to his brother passing away all of a sudden, he left the project. In 1981, Lynch was hired as director by executive producer Dino De Laurentiis. David Lynch spent the next 3.5 years working on DUNE. When it came out, it completely bombed due to it failing to find an audience, and also confusing many who actually saw it, costing around $47 million and only recouping $27 million stateside. It completely tanked. In Europe, it was better received by the public and critics, but still struggled to make a profit. Now with the story, please bear with me, this may get a bit confusing. In the far future, the known universe is ruled by Emperor Shaddam IV. The most important substance in his galactic empire is the spice melange. The spice has many special properties, such as extending life and expanding consciousness. The most profitable of all its properties is the ability to assist the Space Guild with folding space. The spice is vital to space travel, because it allows safe interstellar travel to any part of the universe instantaneously. Sensing a potential threat to spice production, the Guild sends a navigator to demand an explanation from the Emperor, who confidently shares his plans to destroy House Atreides. The popularity of Duke Leto Atreides has grown, and he is suspected to be amassing a secret army using sonic weapons called welding modules, making him a threat to the Emperor. Shaddam's plan is to give the Atreides control of the planet Arrakis, also known as DUNE, the only source of spice, and to have them ambushed there by their longtime enemies, the Harkonnens. The navigator commands the Emperor to kill the Duke's son, Paul Atreides, a young man who dreams of visions of his purpose. The order draws the attention of the Bene Gesserit sisterhood, as Paul is tied to their centuries-long breeding program, which seeks to produce the superhuman Kwisatz Haderach. Meanwhile, on the industrial world of Gedi Prime, the sadistic Baron Harkonnen tells his nephews about his plan to eliminate the Atreides by manipulating someone into betraying the Duke. The Atreides leave Galadan for Arrakis, a barren desert planet plagued by gigantic sandworms and populated by the Fremen, a mysterious band of people who have long held a prophecy that a Messiah would come to lead them to freedom. Upon arrival on Arrakis, Leto is informed by one of his right-hand men, Duncan, that the Fremen have been underestimated, as they exist in vast numbers and could prove powerful allies. Leto gains the trust of the Fremen, but before the Duke can establish an alliance with them, the Harkonnens launch their attack. While the Atreides had anticipated the trap, they were unable to withstand the attack. Supported by the Emperor's elite troops, and aided by a traitor within the House Atreides itself, Dr. Wellington Yueh. Captured, Leto dies in a failed attempt to assassinate the Baron Harkonnen using a poison gas capsule planted in his tooth by Dr. Yuri. Leto's concubine Lady Jessica and his son Paul escape to the deep desert, where they manage to join a band of Fremen. Paul emerges as Muad'Dib, the leader the Fremen have been waiting for. The casting in the movie works really well, and they generally made good choices. The main star is Carl MacLachlan, does extremely well for his first film, and is very likeable. Patrick Stewart and Max von Sydow only have small roles, but leave a lasting impression. This shows how good they are as actors. Sean Young, who plays the love interest for Paul Atreides, is okay in the film, but very forgettable. She doesn't really have any interesting dialogue. The Baron, played by Kenneth McMillan, gives a very over-the-top and creepy performance. There's a kind of homosexual nature to his character. The first scene you see him in, he practically gropes this guy as he pulls his heart plug out, and later he is seen dribbling over his nephew, played by Sting. It's all very odd. Sting comes across as very laid back in the film, and is barely in it. He only has a minor role, but a lot of the advertising at the time featured him heavily, mostly down to his huge popularity. Dune had come under criticism for its visual effects. Critics cited the effects looking cheap, considering its huge budget. At first I was scratching my head thinking, what were they talking about, because everything generally looks great, but the weakest part, which I think it was criticised on, was the blue screen. Many of the shots featuring blue screen opticals looked very washed out. The sequence with the giant worms are very inconsistent, with their plate shots, and their mutated guild navigator scene is extremely ambitious, but there are many grading issues with the opticals which I'm not sure are intentional, but they do look a bit rough around the edges. There are 2 shots in space featuring the spaceships, and they do look like cardboard cutouts. They look very 2D. Aside from that, everything else is incredible. Some of the best foreground miniatures I've ever seen, and the spice worms look fantastic. They really managed to achieve the correct scale in design to give them their mass on camera. The film's selling point is its production design, looking like a twisted version of Flash Gordon mixed with a bit of H.R. Giger. They were building sets before the script was even finished. The level of detail is incredible. You really have to watch it a few times to take in the epic designs of the sets, because you'll miss the little fine bits of detail on your first viewing. The soundtrack to Dune is outstanding, with great compositions by Toto, and the Prophecy theme by Brian Eno is very memorable. The whole score is very different to most sci-fi features, and has a very intimidating sound to it, and perfectly blends to the dark and twisted visuals. Some films you watch and the score outdoes the visuals, and feels like it should belong to a more epic feature, but Dune, the visuals really match the music to create something really special. Due to many complaints people had with the film, and with it being very hard to follow, because of its structural narrative, Universal Studios extended the feature to around 3 hours, restoring roughly 40 minutes back into the film for TV. Now during the 80s, many studios would extend features for TV to increase revenue. Superman the movie got extended to roughly 3 hours as well. The studio added a new prologue to the extended cut to help flesh out the background of the movie. They removed the original intro with Virginia Madsen, and used pieces of concept designs and artwork to tell the new prologue. It lasts over 7 minutes and can get a bit tiresome because it's very clumsily put together. The new narration helps simplify certain aspects, but can be a little off-putting throughout the movie. Many of the existing scenes were padded out with new dialogue, and granted some scenes make more sense, but it really drags out the movie. They have repeated effect shots to purposely stretch out the length. Dune fans hated it, and David Lynch removed his name from the TV cut, and the Alan Smithy name was used instead, and the screenplay credit was renamed by David Lynch to Judas Booth, in protest of the changes made. Fans have always wanted David Lynch to recut the movie to the length he originally wanted. Universal Studios have asked him many times if he would like to go back and recut the movie, but he has turned them down every time and doesn't wish to get involved. I thought he would have mellowed with age, but he is still bitter by how he was treated at the time. The issues he had making the movie really changed his attitude working on big budget features. After Dune, he stuck to low budget productions, where he had full control and his artistic creativity wasn't tampered with by producers or studios. I personally don't think David Lynch should have written the screenplay by himself. He did have some assistance on it, but it clearly needed more restructuring, and certain parts streamlined to make it more digestible for its audience. I'm not saying dumbing it down for the general public, it just clearly needed more rewrites. The ending is completely wrong. They tacked on this happy ending with Paul Atreides changing the weather and making it rain, which is ridiculous because it would kill the spice worms. It was an odd choice and clearly a studio decision.
Whoa. Sandworms. You hate them, right? I hate them myself!
Many people say there is a 4-hour cut, which is a bit far-fetched. In the end of the day, they have shown us most of what David Lynch has shot, and obviously it's all a bit of a jumbled mess. But there isn't going to be another hour of stuff that no one has ever seen before, and it's going to completely change the film for the better. Anything they haven't shown us is probably B-roll footage, incomplete effect shots, extended pieces of dialogue, or scenes they have decided to reshoot due to it being overly complicated, which they did once they viewed the rough cut. Many said the book was unfilmable. Screenwriter Harlan Ellison was a supporter of the film when it came out, and he was interviewed for the DUNE Special Edition DVD, expressing his thoughts.
This, I think, is one of the linchpins of Dune's importance, that it ever actually got made. It was a book that shouldn't have been shot. It was a script that couldn't have been written. It was a directorial job that was beyond anyone's doing. It was a production that would beggar the imagination and bankrupt 3 studios. It was a production that could not possibly be marketed in any way that anyone could understand or that they would go to. It didn't hit its audience. It looked like it insulted its audience. It looked like it defamed its originator. And yet, the film was made. And yet the film remains. After all these, we're talking decades here, this film still holds up. And when you go back and you look at it, you are drawn into it.
Many people at the time thought this would be like Star Wars, but it was nothing like that. It was a very unconventional movie. It was a victim of its own expectations. There was little action in the movie. An hour into it, nothing really exciting has happened. If you have read the book, I'm sure you'll still be invested in the story, but many moviegoers would have found the whole film confusing. I've seen it a number of times and still struggle to remember all the names of the characters. I'm trying to figure out who's backstabbing who. From the start, I find it easy to follow, but once you get to Arrakis, I'm lost. Plus, there is no humour in the film. I'm not saying it should be funny on purpose, but it's good to have a balance where the audience can smile. One thing that does bug me in the movie is Paul's sister. They have got a girl who clearly has a bad lisp, which is not her fault, but they could have made more of an effort in their casting choices, and they have dubbed her over with this laughably bad voice. It sounds like a middle-aged woman doing an impression of a child, and it's embarrassing and hilarious at the same time. I know Dune has many fans, and I understand why, because it's a great looking film, and I've read many comments online by the fanbase, and they are clearly aware of the issues with the script, and with it being hard to follow, and they are not blind to its faults. The film is a mess, but it is a beautiful mess.